Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
God's own truth. I was quite wary of getting down to doing today's episode of Cut the Clutter for multiple reasons. First reason, it just looked like a lot of data once again to wade into. And you know that over the past couple of weeks, I have done a lot of database stuff because data is very important. It's very useful. It's also very instructive. But you have to really focus on it and figure out where is the juice. So that is the real decluttering process. So this is the data thrown up by the World Inequality Report, produced by Thomas Piketty and his partners, right? Second reason for my wariness was that I know what will the report say. I've seen the headlines, of course, but I knew what the headlines would say because inequality report will not feature anything different, substantively different about, say, India or any other country, or definitely about India because that is more relevant to us than it did in 2021 or 2020 or 2019 and so on. It will say that India has a very high level of inequality and the world has a very high level of inequality. So once again, that one expression, which as far as I can, you can't always make sure this pestilence never surfaces in your newsroom. But as far as I can, I avoid the use of that word, and I'm breaking that rule right now, deja vu. Because I was taught by old-fashioned news editors who said, don't use foreign words in your writing unless you have no choice. So I use deja vu not to make a point. Other than that, it is a घिसा पिटा thing, right? That inequality hai, kya kare, right? Inequality hai. Because the question that comes, what to do about inequality? And that was the third reason of my wariness, which is that I know these people or these fantastic intellectuals and scholars, they will show the mirror to us as the two scholars, two Nobel Prize winners who have written their foreword, that is Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee. As they say, they begin their foreword by saying exactly this, that it's very tough to hold the mirror to the world in terms of inequality. So when you hold the mirror, and as I said last week in another context, you show us something we don't like. Like I look at the mirror, I don't like. The question is, what can I do about it, right? Maybe my nose is too big. If I really feel rotten about this, I can go to a surgeon and get my nose fixed, right? Would I like to have more hair? I don't have a problem. But if I had a problem, I can go to somebody and get hair transplanted. In fact, my question always is, what will happen if I come home and my dogs and cats refuse to recognize me, right? But jokes apart, the question is, what is the solution? So I know their solutions are predictable. And I also know that I am going to disagree with them vehemently and totally. In fact, my solutions might be exactly the opposite. But I am not an economist. I don't have a PhD in anything. Any doctorates I might have are honoris causa. And unlike late Jayalalitha or Vijay Mallya or many of the other distinguished people, I don't pretend that I have a real doctorate, right? So I can't argue at intellectual levels like that. But I can argue at philosophical levels and at factual levels because I am on the ground. Once again, do you really want to get into this argument? Because you know that this is a polarizing debate. So some people will be on one side, some people will be on the other. The number of people on one side will be much higher than number of people on the other. Why? Because one, there is a lore of, I use that word very carefully, but deliberately to shock you. There is the lore of poverty porn, poverty pornography. And also, there is the lore of seeing the rich suffer. It isn't so much about. So my question when I look at all these solutions is, what do you want? Do you want the fate of the poor better, or do you want to see the rich hurting? If that is what your objective is, then you're doing it for bharas, right? Then you're not doing it to help the poor. So that was the other reason. And finally, the reason was laziness. 2 days I bunked cut the clutter on the excuse that I was traveling. Although in the past I have recorded from wherever I have been, but 2 days I just had too much to do, and then this unfortunate helicopter crash happened. So I thought Snehesh, Alex, Philip was better qualified to speak about it. And I've noticed that many of you have liked it, and a very large number of you have watched that episode of Cut the Clutter. It might have given me an idea. But I thought if 2 days I can get away without doing it, why do it again today, right? So laziness is a very common and very widespread human tendency. So that was also hitting me. Yet, when I started reading up on this, one, I got provoked because I just thought that you can have a diagnosis for a disease. So their diagnosis is correct. That means the data is correct. But it is the treatment which I believe is a killer in this case, particularly for a country like India. That's why I thought it wasn't necessary, it wasn't good just to let this be at the headline level, because this will become a talking point in schools, colleges, government academies, everywhere. Oh, World Inequality Report. India has so much inequality. What to do about it? Look at their prescription. So their diagnosis is one thing, prescription is the other. So the best way to prevent or to counter bad ideas from taking root is to again show the mirror to where the bad ideas come from and look at some more facts, which is what I'm trying to do now. So this is a report. I will share the full copy with you, the link. You can see the report. It's 250 odd pages of thereabouts, maybe a few more. See the report. It's a beautifully written report, very good graphics, and with gratitude to the authors and publishers and the organization that brings it out. We'll be borrowing some of these graphics and making these points from the report to you, using the data from the report. Now, this report has been written finally by Thomas Piketty, Lucas Chancel, who has written many papers with Piketty. In fact, in 2017, if I remember correctly, they had written a paper on inequality in India between 1922 and 2015, right? This research and data from this reflects pretty much the findings from that. Emmanuel Saez, with whom also Piketty has worked now for quite some time. And also Gabriel Zuckman. Forward, as I told you, is by Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee. The authors have also given credit to 27 academic writers, authors, scholars from whose work they have drawn. And I see these 27 names. I find one Indian name there, and it's not a name I'm familiar with. It's Nitin Bharti, but because it's there, I should mention it. Now, the data has come from what is called World Inequality Database that Thomas Piketty runs. You can find all the data. I will give you the URL. You will also see it on my screen. So you can check out all the data for yourself. Now, Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee say the job of holding a mirror to the world can be a frustrating one. That's true. You can't argue with it. What happens if it shows more wrinkles than we want to face up to? That's also a truth. You can't argue with it. And then they go on to compliment the authors for having done this landmark work over many years now. And they say every large region of the world except Europe, mind you, except Europe. And right now we are talking of incomes, not wealth. When I come to wealth, I'll tell you. Every large region of the world except Europe has a situation where bottom 50% of the population on income pyramid, bottom 50% on the income pyramid owns less than or has less than 15% share of the income. So 50% of the population has less than 15% of the income. Sounds bad, but it gets worse in some regions. For example, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East, North Africa, MENA as it's called. It's below 10%. So inequality is even higher. Similarly, richest 10% in these all over the world have more than 40% of the world's income. Now this is earnings or income. Then you come to global wealth. When you come to global wealth, because income ultimately becomes wealth. But what happens with wealth is that once you've got some wealth, that wealth also grows, right? So that wealth also adds to income. It can be interest, it can be stock markets, it can be real estate, it can be gold, it can be anything, it can be Bitcoin for all you know, right? But once you have capital, once you have wealth, you can become wealthier. That wealth grows. Now, do you want to grudge it? Do you not want to grudge it? Do you think people who earn wealth have the right also to earn further on that wealth? Those are arguments which are intellectual as well as philosophical. So I will leave them right now. Now, basic data. Bottom 50% of the world have below less than 2% of global wealth. Not nice. Top 10% have more than 76% of global wealth. I'm reading out these figures very carefully so I don't mix up anything. Top 10% have above 76, Chetar, above 76% of the global wealth. Top 10%, in fact, across the world, see their wealth growing more slowly than before. That's a very important point. And you would say, oh, how come Piketty and team are being so nice to top 10% rich people? Because for them to say that top 10% wealth is not growing as rapidly or as steeply as before might suggest that maybe the world is becoming less unequal. But they are not saying that. They are saying top 10% are growing more slowly than before. The top 1% are growing much faster than before. So between 1995 and 2021, they said top 1% collected 38% of global increment in wealth, right? So 1% people over this 26-year period collected almost 40%, 38% of the increase in global wealth. And that led to an increase in inequality. Similarly, or contrarily, bottom 50% earned only below 2% of global wealth. Now, global top 0.1%, right? 1 is 1 in 100, 1%, 0.1 is 1 in 1,000. So, top 0.1% of the world's earners or rich people saw their share of the global wealth go up from 7% to 11%. That's more than a 50% growth. And remember, global wealth is also growing. So it's not as if their personal wealth has grown by 50%. That's grown by a lot more because global wealth has grown. Meanwhile, the base has grown meanwhile. They also go on to say that between 1945 and 1980, the world had seen an epoch of increasing equality or decreasing or shrinking inequality. Now that was 1945 is when the World War ended. Then decolonization took place. Many countries got their own governments, as did India. Then Europe had its Marshall Plan. America had the baby boomers phase. So all kinds of things happened and the world became a less unequal place. That is factually correct. Actually, none of the facts can be disputed. It is I told you, the diagnosis can't be disputed. It is the prescription that we might have some arguments with. Now, they say that 1945 to 1980, they were shrinking global inequality. When I read it, I in fact wrote on my notes, on my own, did not happen in India, right? Because that was my impression, because I grew in that period. Not quite 45, but I'm a child of the mid 50s or late 50s, right? So I said, did not happen in India. There was a lot more inequality than we might see now, because there were a lot more starving people. There was a lot more people fighting for basic food grain, sugar. In fact, in the mid 70s, the slogan of the opposition used to be about Indira Gandhi, Indra tere shasan mein, kuda bigya ration mein. That Indra, in your reign, even rubbish is sold in ration shops. Or maybe it meant the opposite, which is Indira Gandhi, in your reign, what is sold in ration shops is kuda, is rubbish, it's garbage, right? These were very frustrating decades. So I thought that this will not be correct, but as I read up the India chapter, they explain that actually inequality was less. Now I might say inequality was less because the Indian middle class was much smaller than it is now. Inequality may look higher because Indian middle class is much bigger and Indian capitalist class is enormously bigger after economic reform. But that doesn't mean India was less poor earlier or India is more poor now, or the fate of India's poor was better until 1980 than it is now. That is completely wrong. Please don't draw the wrong conclusions. Draw the right conclusions. So, entrepreneurial culture. They say now they are coming to their ideological explanations and their philosophical explanations to which they are entitled. Again, we are entitled to agree or disagree. They say that this is a result, the rising inequality after 1980 is the result of a new entrepreneurial culture for which they blame, specifically, for which they blame the Thatcher-Reagan doctrine, right? That was the free markets doctrine. Thatcher came into UK, Reagan came into America, and they changed the world in a way. They changed the world economic thinking in a certain way, and that has continued on despite some setbacks, 2008 global financial crisis, COVID, etc. That generally has not changed direction. Even Joe Biden in America, he's not Bernie Sanders. The British did not elect Jeremy Corbyn. They are unlikely as of today to elect Keir Starmer, irrespective of how bumblingly incompetent Boris Johnson may sound to his critics. But the Americans, even Democrats in America, did not prefer Bernie Sanders or even Elizabeth Warren to the centrist Joe Biden. Similarly, in Britain, they did not elect Jeremy Corbyn because the direction of global economy was set in the Reagan-Thatcher era. Now, these scholars, led by Piketty, want to reverse that. They want to put the clock back on that Reagan-Thatcher era. And they want to take you back into the glorious days of socialism, say 60s, 70s, when Britain was a communist country most of the time. In fact, I had a walk the talk interview with V.S. Naipaul. It was sit the talk because he wouldn't walk, he sat. And he said, "What do you know about communism, huh?" He told me, "You people keep on electing communist parties." That is when the left had got a lot of seats in 2004 elections. And I said, in India, communists are very popular. He said, "That is because you've never lived in a communist system. I have." So I said, "Sir Vidya, when did you live in a communist system?" He said, "Britain. Britain used to be a communist country." So somehow there is nostalgia that you go back to that kind of socialist system of high taxation. So they say this entrepreneurial culture, that is the post-Reagan-Thatcher, where regulation, taxes, labor unions and minimum wage laws, things that moderated inequality, they've been dumped. On the other hand, the idea is to make as much profit as possible and to be completely unapologetic about it. And they say that needs to change. So see the graphic which I have taken from the report. It shows top 10 and bottom 50 income gaps in various regions, various countries. So please see that graphic, and thank you very much, World Inequality Report, for letting us borrow that graphic from you. Now, average human, this report tells us, average human today, in terms of purchasing power parity, earns the equivalent of $23,380 per year. 23,380, you can multiply by 75, 74, whatever you feel like. I will just show you one set of figures on my screen. So I will multiply $23,380 in today's rupee terms, and then you can extrapolate the rest as we go on. Similarly, they say average adult owns $1,02,600. It's all on purchasing power parity. And they say this shows that 10% of the richest own 50%, 50% of the poorest own 8.5%. So 10% of the richest own 52%, 50% of the poorest, or the bottom half, own 8.5%. So you can see inequality. Then further, they're going to tell us that Middle East, North America is the most unequal, obviously, because Mohammed bin Salman will be so wealthy and so rich. So an average Saudi who is not poor, the gap between them will be humongous, right? So Middle East, North Africa is the most unequal region in the world. Europe actually is in the best situation, where the top 10% own only 36% of the wealth. But you know, this is not an equalization of poverty or equalization of riches. Some people will be rich, some people will be poor, some people will be less rich, some people will be more poor, right? That is the way the world is. East Asia has about 43% wealth owned by top 10%. And Latin America, it gets worse, it's 55%. Then they say in the rest of the world, They are countries with exceptions. So Brazil and India have a very high level of inequality, also large populations, very high level of inequality. Then they say some countries have somewhat high level of inequality, that's China for example, and some are moderate to low, say Malaysia and Uruguay in Latin America. Close to early 20th century, they say, at the peak of Western imperialism, there was massive inequality in the world. And they say today the global inequality levels have come close to where they were in the beginning of the 20th century at the peak of Western imperialism. Now that makes it look ugly. Now there are other usual socialist cribs, which is that governments are becoming poorer, nations are becoming richer. My editorial view, I think that's a very good idea. Who wants your government to be rich and people poor, right? It's the same old line that Nitin Gadkari uses all the time. Jis desh ka raja vyapari, uski praja bhikhari. So I'd rather that praja is vyapari and makes more money. Government does basically what it's supposed to do, which in our case, government does not do adequately. So see figure 9 from the executive summary of this report. This figure 9 tells you average annual wealth growth rate. And this shows that for the top 1%, growth rate has been 38%. Figure 10, on the other hand, also shows you how the top 0.1% are doing. So please see these figures. I will keep them on the screen for some time so you can study them, take a screenshot if you so wish. It also gives you a listing of billionaires globally. Billionaires, right? Everybody hates a billionaires but wants to be one, or at least wants one of their children to be one, right? Then they say in the report that we are also giving you an online simulator in the report where you can go and you can figure out what kind of wealth taxation you should have to bring about some equalization. So the diagnosis is right. There is a lot of inequality and it's gone up. Richer people, they are going up in numbers, but there is too much disparity, too much difference between the rich, the middle class and the poor, but their treatment is just tax people's wealth. Now we don't know how exactly will this wealth be calculated if there is going to be taxation like this. India used to have wealth tax, but it was given up because it was misused. Nobody quite paid it. People found several ways of getting around it. So India used to have wealth tax, inheritance tax. Those were bad ideas which were given up fortunately during the phase of reform. But that is what the debate in the Western world is about. That's what the debate in America is about. That's where, say, the progressives of the Democratic Party are on the same side as Piketty and the rest. And that's where the European left also is. But you know, Europe and America, they have the luxury of having broken out. They have much less inequality today because they have grown so much over time. And you remember a line that we use often, that a rising tide, growth is a rising tide. A rising tide lifts all boats, but it lifts the yachts first, right? And that is what the rich are. So the wealthy become wealthier when growth comes, but everybody benefits. Now, everybody doesn't mean absolutely everybody. A lot more people benefit from growth than would if there was no growth or if there was degrowth, as we saw last year in India because of the pandemic. Now, they go on to say the challenges of the 21st century cannot be met unless we address the question of significant redistribution of income and wealth. Robin Hood, chhin lo, baant do, right? Grab and distribute. And they say that welfare state which came into being in the 20th century, mid-20th century, which was based on steep taxation rates, that's been given up. So there's a nostalgia, why can't we get it back? So what they want is, their prescription is some kind of a progressive tax, right? And they show you India's taxation. They show you the world's taxation. So please see this graphic. This is also from their report. Please see this graphic. And it tells you the higher the tax, the more progressive it is. Remember, these are socialist, leftist talking. So the higher the tax rate, the more progressive you are. And see this data, see this chart. And I have circled where India is at the top, right? India is at the top at the same time as UK is at the top, right? That is mid-70s. That is also the socialist era in Britain. That ruined Britain's economy, got people angry, and that brought Thatcher in, right? And that allowed Thatcher to make all those radical changes. That is also the time when India's tax rates were the highest, which is the highest on progressiveness index. India's tax rates in mid 70s were 97%. Now, I was in college at that period. If you are young, ask your parents, did India feel, look, sound less unequal than it is now? India sounded a miserable, poor, unequal country at that point, and nobody paid 97% tax. It was because of this so-called progressive taxation, which was mainly to impress the poor. देखा मैंने अमीर आदमी को कितना ठोका, खत्म कर दिया. I have finished the rich. Mrs. Gandhi has finished the rich, but Mrs. Gandhi finished India's wealth. Mrs. Gandhi never allowed India's wealth to grow, and if people were able to earn wealth, they took it outside. So that also planted the seed of India's black economy, foreign bank accounts, Swiss bank accounts, etc., flight of capital. So 97% tax is seen on this chart as progressive. Thank you very much. I know, I can guarantee to you that is not going to happen again. India already has high taxation at the top level, which is not Mukesh Ambani's or Gautam Adani's level. The tax is almost 44%, plus you have an average of 18% GST. So this country is already taxing people at a very high rate. Now I can do no better than share with you the chart that they have on inequality in India, and see it carefully. If you see bottom 50%, they own almost nothing by way of wealth or by way of assets. So their assets are about 66,000 rupees, that is below 6% of national wealth. Bottom 50%, half of India owns less than 6% of India's assets, of India's wealth. The middle 40% owns a bit more. So once again, as I keep speaking, this table showing inequality in India will remain on the screen. You can take a closer look at it. How much by way of percentage wealth that the bottom 50% of India owns, how much the top 10%, etc., and how much the middle class owns, and you can see there is a lot of inequality. But the solution to this, that you just start taxing the few rich people so heavily that they either lose all their wealth, so they don't have the ability to invest back, create more jobs, make this middle class grow. Because ultimately, what is the best way? Now this is my opinion. What is the best way of removing poverty? It is to get more people to move up the pyramid. It is not just taking from the top of the pyramid and throwing as free this, free that. It is to create an entrepreneurial environment so more growth take place. I know growth has become a bad word these days in at least this debating culture, but more growth takes place, more jobs are created, people who get jobs then set up their homes, buy goods, buy scooters, cars. I know that immediately a lot of people will say this is consumerism. But consumerism is not something that you can deny to the poor just because they are poor today, and you can keep enjoying it because you have it, right? It doesn't work like that. So the way to remove inequality is to make more people less poor, not the more people less rich. Some of that needs to be done. That's why between income tax and GST we pay about 61% tax in the country. How much more tax can Government of India charge its citizens or its corporates? It can go back to 97% if it makes somebody happy, but we know what happened when you had 97%. So as I was thinking this through, I remembered the mid-70s. Mid-70s was among the most difficult period in India economically. That is when India topped the world in progressive taxation, 97%, shabash, right? India was a socialist utopia, and that is when the big problems in India were Mengai. Inflation was going into late 20%, 27, 28, 29%, right? There were shortages of everything. Even the top hit movies of that period were about shortages, Mengai, that is price rise, right? About adulteration of food. And that's what also built the legend of Manoj Kumar, actor Manoj Kumar as Bharat. So as I was reflecting on it, what came to my mind was something from a film called Roti, Kapda aur Makan. That came out in 1974. That was India's glory days of progressive taxation, right? 1974, it was a big starrer, had Manoj Kumar, Amitabh Bachchan, Shashi Kapoor. They were both brothers of Manoj Kumar's in the film. Zeenat Aman, Maushmi Chatterjee, and many others, Prem Nath and Madan Puri and many others. That film had a song, Baki Kuch Bacha To Mehngai Maar Gayi. Chances are that you've heard it at some point of time. Now, it is a long song, beautiful lyrics written by Varma Malik, but there is a particular stanza that rings in my head as I read this report and reflect on its prescriptions. It says, Shakkar mein ye aate ki milai maar gayi. Shakkar is sugar, atta. So you adulterate your sugar with atta, with wheat flour, right? Wheat flour is cheaper than sugar. Powder wale doodh di malai maar gayi, right? So you, because you're short of milk in the country. Remember, this country was short of milk. In fact, every summertime there was a ban on sweets made with milk like barfi, rasmalai, sandesh, nationwide ban to conserve milk because there was a milk shortage. We've come from there. That was our socialist utopia, or such as it was. शक्कर में ये आटे की मिलाई मार गई, पाउडर वाले दूध दी मलाई मार गई, राशन वाली लाइन दी लंबाई मार गई. I have stood in those lines, so I know what ration lines used to be. जनता जो चीखी चिल्लाई मार गई, बाकी कुछ बचा तो महंगाई मार गई. And it's beautiful words, and we have to remember those when these bad ideas float in the air again. There are lines like, पहले मुट्ठी में पैसे लेकर थैला भर शक्कर लाते थे. That you could take a fistful of money and bring bag full of sugar with that. अब थैले में पैसे जाते हैं, मुट्ठी में शक्कर आती है. Now take a bag full of money and bring a fistful of sugar. That is because India was dealing with 25, 27, 28% inflation. So remember, we had the glory days of progressive taxation in India, 97%, the highest in the world, matching the British at that point. This had similar consequences for both countries' economies. The British were smart, they corrected it then and elected Margaret Thatcher. We took too long and we are still struggling on with this, but with whatever's happened 1991 onwards, India is much, much, much better off than before, and Indians are much, much, much better off than before. And I'm not just talking of Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani.